The notification on my phone showed a $1,500 fine from the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. And I nearly drove my truck off the road when I read it was, because I had left autumn leaves unraked in my yard for more than 72 hours. My name is Oliver Jacobs, and I had just moved to this quiet neighborhood in Westfield, Massachusetts, 6 months ago, thinking I had finally found peace after my divorce. The modest 2-story colonial house seemed perfect, the neighbors were pleasant enough, and the tree-lined streets reminded me of the small town where I grew up. That was before I met Patricia Henderson, the HOA president who seemed to believe she ran a military installation rather than a residential community. I pulled into my driveway and stared at my front yard. Yes, there were leaves scattered across the grass. It was late October, and the massive oak trees lining my property were still dropping their foliage. I had raked just 3 days ago, filling 12 bags that I had dutifully placed by the curb. The wind had brought more leaves down, as wind tends to do in autumn. I grabbed my phone and looked at the fine notice again, reading the exact violation code and the timestamp showing the complaint had been filed at 7:15 this morning. The garage door opener hummed as I parked inside. My golden retriever, Max, bounded up to greet me, his tail wagging with the kind of enthusiasm only dogs possess. I scratched behind his ears and checked his water bowl before heading inside to change. The fine notice included a phone number for the HOA office, which according to the message had office hours until 6 in the evening. I glanced at my watch. It was 4:30. I had time. 20 minutes later, I walked into the small office building at the edge of our development. The receptionist, a young woman with bright purple hair and multiple piercings, looked up from her computer screen with an expression that suggested she already knew why I was there. "Let me guess," she said before I could speak. "You got one of the leaf fines. One of them." I set my phone on the counter, showing her the notice. How many people did she fine? 17 homes this week alone. She lowered her voice and glanced toward the closed door behind her. "Mrs. Henderson has been on a warpath ever since the town council rejected her proposal to ban all deciduous trees in the neighborhood. She claims they're a nuisance and decrease property values. That's insane. The trees are half the reason I bought here." The door behind her opened, and Patricia Henderson emerged. She was exactly what you would expect from an HOA president who fined people for autumn leaves. Mid-50s, perfectly coiffed blonde hair that probably required weekly salon visits, designer clothes that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager," and a smile that could freeze vodka. "Mr. Jacobs," she said, my name dripping from her lips like acid. "I assume you are here to discuss your violation." "I'm here to discuss why I'm being fined $1,500 for having leaves in my yard during fall. The community guidelines are very clear. All leaves must be removed within 72 hours of falling. You raked on Saturday. Today is Wednesday. That is 4 days, Mr. Jacobs. 4 days of blight on our beautiful neighborhood." I took a deep breath, counting to 5 in my head. "Mrs. Henderson, I raked on Saturday. More leaves fell Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday because that's what happens with trees. Should I be out there every single day with a rake? If that's what it takes to maintain our community standards, then yes." She crossed her arms. "The fine stands. You have 30 days to pay or we will place a lien on your property. Good day." She turned to retreat to her office, but I stopped her with my next words. "I'll be contesting this fine. This is unreasonable and I think any judge would agree." Patricia turned back, her eyes narrowing. "Contest all you wish. The HOA bylaws are legally binding. You signed them when you purchased your home." She paused at her door. "And Mr. Jacobs, I noticed your mailbox is 2 inches lower than the regulation height. I would fix that before you receive another citation." The door clicked shut behind her. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic look and slid a business card across the counter. "That's the lawyer who helped my neighbor fight an HOA fine. She's good." I took the card. Attorney Sarah Mitchell, with an office in downtown Westfield. I thanked the receptionist and left, my mind already racing through options. $1,500 was not something I could just brush off, especially after the divorce had cleaned out my savings. But more than the money, it was the principle. This was extortion dressed up in community guidelines. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, reading through every page of the HOA bylaws I had barely glanced at when purchasing the house. Max lay at my feet, occasionally sighing in his sleep. The document was 73 pages of single-spaced regulations covering everything from fence heights to the acceptable color range for house paint. The leaf provision was there, buried in Section 14, subsection C. It did indeed say 72 hours, but it also included a clause about reasonable accommodation for natural processes and weather conditions. That seemed like a loophole big enough to drive through. I called Attorney Mitchell's office first thing Thursday morning. Her secretary scheduled me for Monday afternoon, which meant I had 4 days to document everything and gather evidence. I spent the weekend photographing every yard in the neighborhood, noting which ones had leaves and which were pristine. Out of the 87 homes I could easily access, 43 had visible leaves in their yards. Yet according to the HOA website, only 17 had been fined. I made a spreadsheet tracking the data and noticed something interesting. All 17 homes that were fined were on the eastern side of the development. The western side, where Patricia Henderson lived in a sprawling mini-mansion, had been completely overlooked despite several properties having leaf-covered lawns. Monday afternoon found me in Attorney Mitchell's office, a converted Victorian house with creaky floors and walls lined with law books. Sarah Mitchell was younger than I expected, probably in her early 40s, with sharp eyes behind stylish glasses and a handshake that meant business. "HOA disputes are becoming more common," she said after I explained my situation. "Particularly in Massachusetts, where we have very strong property rights laws. Tell me everything." I walked her through the fine, my documentation of selective enforcement, and Patricia Henderson's threat about the mailbox. Sarah took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. "The selective enforcement is good," she said finally. "That shows discriminatory practices. But fighting these things in court can be expensive and time-consuming. The HOA knows this, which is why they get away with it. Most people just pay the fine rather than spend $5,000 fighting a $1,500 penalty." "So what do you recommend?" "Let me send them a letter outlining the selective enforcement issue and the reasonable accommodation clause. Sometimes a lawyer's letterhead is enough to make them back down. If not, we can discuss next steps." She quoted me a fee for the letter that was reasonable enough. I agreed and left feeling slightly more optimistic. That optimism lasted until Wednesday, when I received Patricia Henderson's response. The letter, on official HOA letterhead, dismissed the selective enforcement claim by stating that the HOA conducted rolling enforcement to ensure comprehensive coverage over time. The reasonable accommodation clause, according to her interpretation, applied only to weather events that made raking impossible, such as hurricanes or blizzards. Normal autumn leaf fall did not qualify. The fine stood, and I now had 23 days to pay. I called Sarah immediately. She read the response over the phone as I forwarded it to her email. Rolling enforcement, she said with clear disgust in her voice. That's a new one. Essentially, they are admitting they selectively enforce but claiming it's intentional and fair because eventually everyone will get fined. That's not how the law works, but I see what they are doing. So what now? Now we file a motion in district court challenging the fine. It will cost you about $3,000 in legal fees, possibly more if this drags out. I have to be honest with you, Oliver. Even if we win, the HOA will likely appeal, and you will be looking at significant costs. These organizations often have substantial war chests from years of collected dues. They can outlast most individual homeowners. I sat on my back porch, watching Max chase squirrels in the yard. $3,000 minimum to fight a $1,500 fine. It was financial insanity, but the idea of giving Patricia Henderson that money made my stomach turn. More than that, I kept thinking about the 17 other homeowners who had been fined. How many of them had just paid rather than fight? How much money had the HOA collected from this scheme? That night, I could not sleep. I kept running through scenarios, trying to find an angle that did not involve bankrupting myself in legal fees. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and made coffee, then opened my laptop to look at my property deed. I had received it when I closed on the house, but like most people, I had barely glanced at it beyond confirming the address matched. The deed was a scanned PDF, slightly blurry in places where the original document showed its age. My property was listed as Lot 47 of the Meadowbrook development, containing 0.34 acres. But as I scrolled down to the legal description, something caught my eye. The document referenced a previous deed from 1952, before the development existed. I clicked on the county assessor's website and started digging through historical records. The Meadowbrook development had been built in phases between 1985 and 1990 on what was previously farmland. The farm had belonged to a family named Jameson, who sold the property to a developer called Riverside Properties, LLC. I traced the chain of title backward, clicking through deed after deed, each one taking me further into the past. At 4 in the morning, exhausted and swimming in property law terminology I barely understood, I found something that made me sit up straight. The original Jameson farm deed from 1891 included a detailed survey map. The property boundaries were described using landmarks that no longer existed, but the assessor's office had helpfully overlaid the old survey onto a modern map. I zoomed in on where my house sat. According to the 1891 deed, my lot was part of the main farmhouse property. But there was another section marked on the old map, described as common ground reserved for perpetual use by main property holder. I enlarged the map as much as the PDF would allow. The common ground area, based on the overlay, appeared to sit exactly where the neighborhood park was now located. The park was a 5-acre green space in the center of the development, complete with playground equipment, walking trails, and a small pavilion. The HOA maintained it, held events there, and used it as a selling point for the neighborhood. According to this old deed, it was supposed to remain tied to the original farmhouse property in perpetuity. My house sat on what had been the farmhouse lot. I checked the legal description in my current deed again. It said I owned Lot 47, together with all rights, easements, and appurtenances thereunto belonging. Appurtenances was a legal term I had to Google. It meant rights that transferred with the property, even if not explicitly listed. I leaned back in my chair, my heart racing. If the common ground designation had never been properly dissolved, and if my property was the legal successor to the farmhouse lot, then I might own the park. Or at the very least, I had a legal claim to it. The sun was coming up when I finally went to bed, my mind spinning with possibilities. I slept for 3 hours, then called Sarah Mitchell's office the moment they opened. "I need you to research something," I told her secretary. "It's about my property deed and some historical records. It's urgent." Sarah called me back that afternoon. "I looked at what you sent me. Oliver, this is potentially significant. The common ground designation was never formally released in any of the subsequent deeds. It's like everyone just forgot about it. The developer should have filed paperwork to dissolve that restriction, but I cannot find any record of it." "So what does that mean?" "It means we need a real estate attorney who specializes in title issues. This is beyond my expertise, but if your theory is correct, you might have a legitimate claim to that park, or at least to significant rights regarding it. Either way, it's leverage." She referred me to an attorney in Boston named Robert Chen, who apparently lived for complicated title disputes. I called him immediately and explained the situation. He asked me to send over everything I had found, which I did while still on the phone. "Give me 48 hours, Robert said. "I need to pull the complete chain of title and research case law on perpetual common ground designations. This is interesting, Mr. Jacobs, potentially very interesting." Those 48 hours felt like 48 weeks. I went to work at my job as an IT consultant, barely able to concentrate on database configurations and user access issues. I came home and obsessively checked my email. Max seemed to sense my anxiety and stayed close, his warm presence a small comfort. Robert called me Thursday evening. "We need to meet in person. Can you come to Boston tomorrow? I have an opening at 10. I took the day off work and drove into the city Friday morning. Boston traffic was its usual nightmare, but I managed to find parking near Robert's office in the financial district. His suite occupied half a floor in a glass tower, with views of the harbor and enough mahogany furniture to build a ship. Robert Chen was a small man in his 60s, wearing an immaculate suit and a smile that suggested he had found something juicy. He gestured for me to sit at his conference table, which was covered with documents, maps, and a laptop displaying what appeared to be a survey overlay. "Mr. Jacobs, you have stumbled onto something remarkable," he began. "The short version is this. Your property is the legal successor to the Jameson farmhouse lot. The 1891 deed established common ground that was explicitly tied to the farmhouse property in perpetuity. That designation was never dissolved. When Riverside Properties LLC bought the farm and subdivided it, they violated the deed restriction. When they built the park on the common ground and designated it as HOA property, they essentially gave away something they did not have clear title to. So I own the park. It's more complicated than that. You have a superior claim to the property, but the HOA has been maintaining it for 35 years, which creates some adverse possession issues. However, adverse possession requires that the possession be hostile and under claim of right. The HOA never claimed to own the park outright. They maintain it as common property for the neighborhood. That actually works in your favor because it means they have not been possessing it adversely. They have been functioning more as a maintenance service. My head was spinning. What does this mean practically? Practically, it means you have significant leverage. If you wanted to push this, we could file a quiet title action and likely establish that you have superior rights to the park property. The HOA would have to negotiate with you for access and use. We could also argue that all the money they have collected in dues for park maintenance over the years should have gone to you, since you are the actual property holder. How much money are we talking about? Robert slid a spreadsheet across the table. Based on the HOA's financial records, which are public, They collect approximately $120,000 annually in dues. Of that, about 30% goes to park maintenance and improvements. Over 35 years, accounting for inflation and increased dues, you are looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million. I felt the blood drain from my face. $2 million. It's a ballpark figure, but yes. Of course, recovering that money would be difficult and would require extensive litigation. The HOA would argue they added value through improvements, that the statute of limitations applies to older claims and various other defenses. But the threat of such a claim would be powerful leverage in negotiating a settlement. What kind of settlement? That depends on what you want. If you want them to drop the fine and leave you alone, this would accomplish that immediately. If you want compensation for their improper use of your property, we could negotiate something. If you want to cause Patricia Henderson maximum headaches, we could file the quiet title action and let her explain to the neighborhood why their beloved park might have to close, because the HOA never properly secured title to it. I thought about Patricia's smug face when she threatened to put a lien on my property. I thought about the 17 other homeowners who had been shaken down for ridiculous fines. I thought about the receptionist's comment that this had been going on for years. I want justice, I said. Not just for me, but for everyone she has been victimizing. What's the play? Robert's smile widened. First, we file the quiet title action. That's a court proceeding to establish your superior claim to the park property. We also send a cease and desist letter to the HOA, informing them they are using your property without permission and demanding they stop all activities there until this is resolved. We will copy every homeowner in the neighborhood on that letter. Then we sit back and watch. How much will this cost me? I will handle it on contingency. If we recover money, I take 30%. If we just get your fine dismissed and negotiate some nuisance value settlement, you pay me a flat fee of $5,000. I am willing to take the risk because I think this case is fascinating and I would love to stick it to an abusive HOA. I shook his hand. Let's do it. The quiet title action was filed the following Wednesday in Hampton County Superior Court. The cease and desist letter went out the same day, sent via certified mail to the HOA office and regular mail to every address in the Meadowbrook development. Robert had crafted it beautifully, explaining in plain English that the park property was subject to a deed restriction that gave me superior rights, that the HOA had never obtained proper title, and that all use of the park must cease immediately pending resolution of the legal dispute. My phone started ringing within hours. Neighbors I had barely spoken to called asking what was going on. Some were angry, thinking I was trying to steal the park. Others were curious about the legal history. A few expressed support, saying they were tired of Patricia's tyrannical rule. I referred everyone to Robert's office and tried to stay calm. Patricia Henderson called me directly Thursday morning. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. By the fifth call, I answered. "Mr. Jacobs, what do you think you are doing?" Her voice was shrill enough to hurt my ears. "I am exercising my property rights, Mrs. Henderson. That park belongs to this community. You cannot just claim ownership because you found some old document. Actually, I can, and I have. If you would like to discuss this, please contact my attorney." I gave her Robert's number and hung up. She called back immediately. I declined the call and blocked her number. The HOA held an emergency meeting that Saturday. I was not invited, but the receptionist with purple hair, whose name I learned was Madison, texted me updates. Apparently, Patricia had hired the HOA's attorney, a man named Douglas Winters, who had reviewed Robert's filing and confirmed that my claim had legal merit. The HOA board was in panic mode. Several board members wanted to negotiate immediately. Patricia was refusing, insisting this was a bluff. The meeting apparently devolved into chaos, with homeowners demanding answers about how this situation had been allowed to happen. Someone asked if the title insurance from when the development was built would cover this. Douglas Winters had to explain that the developer's title insurance from 35 years ago was not going to help the HOA now. Another homeowner asked why the HOA had never done a title search on the park property. No one had a good answer. By Monday, local news had picked up the story. A reporter from the Westfield News called me for comment. I gave them a brief statement about protecting my property rights and referred them to Robert for legal details. The article that ran Tuesday morning framed it as "Local Homeowner Challenges HOA Over Historic Property Rights." It mentioned my fine for leaves, which added a nice David versus Goliath angle. The story got picked up by a Boston television station. Suddenly, I had a news crew in my driveway asking me to pose in front of my leaf-covered yard. I kept my comments brief and factual, but the story they aired that evening made Patricia look terrible. They found 3 other homeowners who had been fined for minor violations, and all of them spoke on camera about the HOA's aggressive tactics. Patricia made the mistake of agreeing to an interview. She spent 5 minutes insisting that rules were rules, that property values depended on strict enforcement, and that my legal claim was frivolous. The reporter asked her about the selective enforcement and the selective rolling enforcement theory. Patricia stammered something about resource allocation. Then the reporter asked if she had any evidence that the developer properly dissolved the 1891 deed restriction. Patricia said that was the developer's responsibility, not the HOA's. The reporter asked why the HOA never verified they had proper title to property they claimed to control. Patricia ended the interview. The public relations disaster was immediate. The HOA's Facebook page was flooded with comments criticizing Patricia's leadership. An online petition calling for her resignation gathered 200 signatures in 24 hours. Several board members publicly distanced themselves from her hardline stance. Douglas Winters called Robert Thursday afternoon. Robert put the call on speaker so I could listen from his Boston office, where I had driven for a strategy meeting. "My clients want to negotiate," Douglas said. "What are Mr. Jacobs's terms?" Robert looked at me. We had discussed this. I nodded. "First," Robert said, "the $1,500 fine is dismissed immediately, along with any fines issued to other homeowners in the past 6 months. Second, the HOA revises their enforcement policies to eliminate selective prosecution and establishes an appeals process. Third, the HOA acknowledges Mr. Jacobs's superior interest in the park property and enters into a 99-year lease for $1 per year, giving them rights to maintain and operate the park. Fourth, the HOA pays Mr. Jacobs $100,000 in consideration for said lease and to compensate for historical unauthorized use of his property." $100,000, Douglas sputtered. "The HOA does not have that kind of cash." "Then they can take out a loan, or we can continue with the litigation and seek the full $2 million in historical damages. Your choice." There was silence on the line. Then Douglas said, "I need to discuss this with my board." "You have 72 hours, Robert said. "After that, we file additional motions and this gets much more expensive for everyone." The call ended. I looked at Robert. "Do you think they will agree?" "They would be idiots not to. $100,000 is nothing compared to what they will spend on legal fees if this drags out. Plus, they get to keep the park, which keeps the homeowners happy. Patricia might lose her position over this, but that's not our problem." He was right. The HOA board met in another emergency session Saturday morning. By Saturday evening, Douglas Winters called Robert to accept the terms. We spent the following week negotiating the exact language of the settlement agreement and the lease. Patricia Henderson fought every point, but she was increasingly isolated. 3 board members resigned in protest of her leadership, and a recall petition was circulating. The settlement was finalized on November 15th. The HOA paid me $100,000 via cashier's check. All fines from the previous 6 months were refunded to the affected homeowners. The HOA bylaws were amended to include an appeals process and explicit anti-discrimination language regarding enforcement. I signed a 99-year lease giving the HOA rights to operate the park, with provisions that the lease could be terminated if the HOA violated the settlement terms. Patricia Henderson was forced to resign as HOA president 3 days later. The recall petition had gathered enough signatures to trigger a special election, and rather than face certain defeat, she stepped down. Madison, the receptionist, told me that Patricia sold her house and moved out of state within a month. I cannot say I was sorry to see her go. The story had one more twist. In January, I received a call from an attorney representing Riverside Properties LLC, or rather, the company that had acquired Riverside's assets years ago. They wanted to discuss a potential claim against me for tortious interference with the development project from 35 years ago. Robert laughed when I forwarded him that letter. "They have no case," he said. "They are fishing, hoping to scare you into giving back some of the settlement money. Ignore them unless they actually file something." They never did. Apparently, their own attorneys had reviewed the situation and told them they had violated the original deed restriction and had no grounds to complain about the consequences decades later. I used part of the settlement money to pay off my legal fees and put the rest in savings. The fine was long gone from my record, and my credit had not been damaged. More importantly, the HOA under new leadership was a completely different organization. The new president was a man named Tom Garcia, a retired teacher who actually believed in community building rather than petty tyranny. He knocked on my door in February to personally apologize for how I had been treated and to ask if I would consider joining the board. I politely declined. I had no interest in HOA politics, but I did appreciate the gesture. The neighborhood changed after Patricia left. People seemed more relaxed, less worried about minor violations bringing down the hammer. The new board instituted a warning system for first-time violations and created a hardship waiver process for homeowners who could not immediately afford to make required changes. Common sense started to prevail over rigid enforcement. I still rake my leaves, though I do it on my own schedule now without fear of fines. Max still chases squirrels in the backyard. I sometimes walk through the park, the one that technically belongs to me for the next 99 years, and watch kids play on the playground equipment. The pavilion hosts summer concerts now, organized by the new HOA board. It is the community resource it was always supposed to be, no longer weaponized as a tool for control. In March, I received a handwritten letter from one of the other homeowners who had been fined. Her name was Susan, and she thanked me for standing up to Patricia. She explained that she had been afraid to fight her fine because she was a single mother on a tight budget and could not afford legal fees. The refund of her $800 penalty had allowed her to fix her car, which she needed to get to work. She said I had given her hope that standing up to bullies was possible. I put that letter on my refrigerator, held in place by a magnet shaped like Massachusetts. It reminded me why I had fought, even when it seemed financially irrational. Some things matter more than money. Justice matters. Standing up to people who abuse power matters. Protecting your neighbors matters. Sarah Mitchell, my original attorney, called me in April with an interesting opportunity. She had been contacted by 3 other homeowners in different Massachusetts towns, all dealing with abusive HOAs, all asking if she knew the lawyer who had won the Meadowbrook case. She wanted to refer them to Robert, but thought I might be interested in knowing that my case had inspired others to fight back. "You have started something," she said. "People are realizing they do not have to just accept whatever their HOA demands. They are researching their deeds, finding irregularities, fighting back. There is a whole network forming online of people sharing information and strategies." That surprised me. I had just been trying to avoid an unjust fine, but I suppose that is how movements start sometimes. One person says no, and it gives others permission to do the same. Robert called me in May with interesting news. 2 of the referrals Sarah had mentioned had turned into cases, and both had found title irregularities similar to mine. One HOA in Worcester had been maintaining a swimming pool on property they did not actually own. Another in Springfield had built their community center on land that was supposed to remain undeveloped agricultural space. Robert was building a practice around these cases, and he credited me with the inspiration. "You should write a book," he said. "People need to know this stuff. They need to know they have rights, and they need to know how to check their deeds before they buy into an HOA." I thought about it, but I am not a writer. I am just a guy who got mad about a stupid fine and happened to have insomnia and curiosity at the right time. The real credit belonged to the Jameson family from 1891, who had the foresight to protect their common ground in perpetuity. They probably never imagined their deed restriction would matter 130 years later, but it did. Summer came to Meadowbrook, bringing warm weather and the smell of fresh cut grass. The oak trees that had caused all this trouble bloomed green and healthy, providing shade for the neighborhood kids who played beneath them. I bought a new grill and started hosting weekend barbecues, getting to know my neighbors properly for the first time. Several of them told me stories about Patricia's reign of terror, fines and threats and petty harassment that they had endured in silence. "You freed us," one neighbor said over a beer in my backyard. "You actually freed us from that woman." It felt like hyperbole, but I understood what he meant. There is something fundamentally oppressive about living in fear of your own home, constantly worried that some minor infraction will result in financial punishment. That is no way to live. A community should feel like a community, not a prison yard. The park hosted its first summer concert series under the new board. Local bands played on Saturday evenings while families spread blankets on the grass and kids ran around with glow sticks. I attended with Max, who became the unofficial mascot of the concerts. People would come up to pet him and thank me again for what I had done. I always felt embarrassed by the attention. I had just been defending myself. The fact that it helped others was a happy accident. In August, I got a letter from the county assessor's office. They had reviewed the title history as part of updating their records and wanted to officially recognize my ownership of the park property, with the HOA listed as long-term lessee. The new deed would reflect the accurate property boundaries and the lease arrangement. It was a bureaucratic detail, but it made the situation official. The county records now showed what the 1891 deed had always said. I owned that land. I framed the letter and hung it in my home office next to Susan's thank you note. Small victories, but meaningful ones. Patricia made one final appearance in the story, though I only learned about it secondhand. Madison told me that Patricia had tried to join the HOA board in her new neighborhood in New Hampshire. During the election process, another board member had Googled her name and found all the news articles about the Meadowbrook situation. Patricia was rejected, and word apparently spread among the local HOA community. Her reputation had followed her. Karma is real, Madison said with satisfaction. She had been promoted to HOA manager after Patricia left, and under her leadership, the office had become actually helpful rather than adversarial. She instituted a customer service approach, helping homeowners understand and comply with guidelines rather than treating every interaction as a gotcha moment. Fall came around again, bringing with it the annual leaf situation. I raked when I felt like it, leaving bags by the curb on my own schedule. Other neighbors did the same. The neighborhood looked lived in and natural, with leaves scattered across yards and kids jumping in leaf piles. It looked like autumn should look, messy and beautiful and temporary. I never received another fine. The HOA sent out friendly reminders about seasonal maintenance, but with reasonable timelines and helpful resources. The transformation was remarkable. Same neighborhood, same houses, completely different energy. All because one tyrant had been removed, and people remembered that communities are supposed to support each other, not police each other. In October, exactly 1 year after the original fine, Tom Garcia knocked on my door. He was holding a plaque. "The board wanted to present you with this," he said. "It is a small token of appreciation for helping us remember what HOAs are supposed to be about." The plaque read, "Presented to Oliver Jacobs in recognition of his dedication to property rights, community welfare, and standing up for what is right. Meadowbrook HOA, October 2025. I was genuinely touched. I invited Tom in for coffee, and we talked about the changes in the neighborhood over the past year. He told me that several other HOAs in the region had reached out asking how Meadowbrook had reformed its practices. Our community was becoming a model for positive HOA governance, which seemed ironic given where we had started. You know what the real lesson is," Tom said. "Power corrupts, but it does not have to. When you have checks and balances, when you have transparency and accountability, an HOA can be a good thing. It is when you get people like Patricia, who see it as their personal fiefdom, that things go wrong." He was right. The structure was not the problem. The HOA provided real value in maintaining common spaces, organizing community events, and preserving property values through reasonable standards. The problem was when one person hijacked that structure to serve their ego and control complex. December brought snow to Massachusetts, covering everything in white and giving the neighborhood a postcard quality. Max loved the snow, bounding through the drifts like a puppy. I shoveled my driveway and walkway, complying with the HOA's winter maintenance guidelines without resentment, because the guidelines were reasonable and fairly enforced. Christmas lights went up throughout the neighborhood, displays ranging from subtle to spectacular. The HOA had historically regulated light displays, but the new board had relaxed those rules significantly. As long as lights came down by mid-January and did not create traffic hazards, anything went. The result was a cheerful variety that reflected the individual personalities of the homeowners. It felt authentic. I kept in touch with Robert Chen, calling him occasionally to catch up on his growing practice. He told me he had 1-2 more cases similar to mine, recovering significant settlements for homeowners who had found title defects in their HOA-controlled properties. He was writing an article for a property law journal about the prevalence of these issues and the need for more thorough title searches before HOA establishment. "You have made my career interesting," he told me during a call in January. I was getting bored with standard real estate closings. This niche practice is intellectually stimulating and financially rewarding. Plus, I get to be the good guy helping people fight bullies. It is the best possible combination. I was glad something positive had come from my situation beyond my immediate relief. If my insomnia-fueled research could help others avoid similar harassment, then the stress had been worth it. February marked 16 months since I had moved to Meadowbrook. It felt like much longer given everything that had happened. But the community I lived in now bore little resemblance to the one I had discovered under Patricia's rule. People waved to each other, helped with snow removal, organized potlucks and game nights. The HOA facilitated these activities rather than stifling them. I finally accepted Tom's invitation to attend a board meeting as a guest. I sat in the back of the room and watched as they discussed upcoming spring projects, reviewed financial statements, and addressed homeowner concerns. The tone was collaborative and respectful. When someone raised a complaint about a neighbor's fence that allegedly violated height restrictions, the board agreed to send a friendly inquiry first and work with the homeowner to find a solution. No fines, no threats, just communication. This was what I had wanted when I first moved here. A normal neighborhood with normal governance. It had taken a legal battle and a small fortune to achieve it, but we had arrived. March brought my first check from the HOA, a dividend payment from their surplus budget. Apparently, under the new management, they had cut costs significantly by eliminating unnecessary legal fees, ending frivolous enforcement actions, and negotiating better contracts with maintenance vendors. The surplus was being returned to homeowners. My check was for $147, not a fortune, but symbolic. The HOA was working for us, not against us. I deposited the check and took Max for a walk through the park. Kids were playing soccer on the field, parents were pushing strollers on the walking path, and an elderly couple sat on a bench feeding ducks in the small pond. It was an ordinary scene of community life, unremarkable and precious. The pavilion had a new sign installed by the walking path. It read, Meadowbrook Community Park, established 1987, preserved 2024. I appreciated that someone had acknowledged the history without making it awkward. In April, I received an unexpected visitor. A woman in her 70s knocked on my door, introducing herself as Margaret Jameson. She explained that she was the great-great-granddaughter of the original Jameson family who had owned the farm. I saw the news stories about your case, she said. I wanted to meet the man who upheld my family's wishes after all these years. I invited her in, and we spent 2 hours talking about the farm's history. She showed me old photographs of the property before it was developed, the farmhouse that had stood approximately where my house now sat, and the common ground that had been preserved for community gatherings and shared agricultural use. Her great-great-grandfather had been a progressive thinker for his time, believing that land should serve the community while remaining under responsible stewardship. He would have approved of what you did, Margaret said. He put that restriction in the deed because he had seen too many communities lose their gathering spaces to private development. He wanted to ensure future generations would always have a place to come together. You honored that intention. She gave me a copy of one of the photographs, showing the original farmhouse surrounded by fields and trees. I had it professionally framed and hung it in my living room. It felt important to remember what had come before, the people who had shaped this land long before any of us arrived. May brought warm weather and the annual HOA meeting to elect board members and approve the budget. I attended as a regular homeowner, no longer the pariah who had sued the association. The meeting was well attended, civil, and efficient. The budget passed unanimously. 3 board positions were up for election, and all 3 incumbents were re-elected without opposition. People were satisfied with the current leadership. Madison gave a report on HOA operations, highlighting improved homeowner satisfaction, reduced complaint volume, and successful community events. She also noted that the HOA had been contacted by 15 other associations in Massachusetts asking for advice on governance reform. Meadowbrook was becoming known as a success story. During the open forum section, one homeowner stood up and said, "I just want to thank Oliver Jacobs for having the courage to stand up for what was right. This community is better because of you." The room erupted in applause. I felt my face turn red, but I nodded in acknowledgement. It was embarrassing and gratifying in equal measure. After the meeting, several homeowners approached me suggesting I should run for the board. I declined politely but firmly. I had no interest in HOA governance. I had simply wanted to live my life without harassment, and I had achieved that goal. Others could handle the organizational work. Summer 2025 arrived with its usual heat and humidity. I worked from home most days, consulting with clients remotely and enjoying the flexibility of my career. Max and I established a routine of morning walks through the neighborhood, evening sessions throwing the ball in the backyard, and weekend trips to explore Massachusetts. Life was good, simple, and blessedly drama-free. The park hosted concerts again, better attended than the previous year. Local businesses started sponsoring the events, and the HOA used the sponsorship money to improve the sound system and add permanent seating. The community was investing in itself, building something sustainable and positive. I sometimes thought about Patricia and wondered if she had learned anything from the experience. Probably not. People like that rarely engage in genuine self-reflection. But she was gone, and that was what mattered. She could no longer hurt anyone in this community. In late July, Robert called with an update on the other cases he had taken on. Both had settled favorably, with the HOAs agreeing to significant reforms and financial compensation for the homeowners who had challenged them. One HOA president had resigned in disgrace, much like Patricia. The other had been voted out in a special election. "We are creating a playbook," Robert said. "Other attorneys are starting to use similar strategies. There is a whole movement forming around HOA accountability. You were patient zero." That made me laugh. Patient zero for HOA reform. It was not how I had envisioned making my mark on the world, but stranger things had happened. August marked 2 years since I had moved to Meadowbrook. I had initially planned to stay 5 years maximum before moving somewhere more rural, away from HOA restrictions entirely. But now I found myself reconsidering. The neighborhood had become what I had originally hoped for when I bought the house. I had friends here, a community I cared about, and roots beginning to take hold. Max was not getting any younger. He was 9 now, still energetic but starting to show his age. The neighborhood knew him and loved him. Kids asked to pet him. Other dog owners coordinated walks with us. He had his favorite spots in the park, his preferred route through the streets. Moving would disrupt his routine, and at his age, routine mattered, so I decided to stay. I was not going anywhere. This was home now, for better or worse. Mostly better, now that the HOA had been reformed. September brought cooler weather and the start of another autumn. Leaves began falling from the oak trees, scattering across my yard in their familiar pattern. I let them accumulate for a few days, enjoying the crunch underfoot when I walked to my mailbox. On the 4th day, I raked them into bags, not because I was worried about a fine, but because it needed to be done and I had the time. Tom Garcia stopped by while I was working, helping me hold open a bag while I filled it. We talked about nothing in particular, the easy conversation of neighbors who have become friends. When I finished, he helped me carry the bags to the curb. "You know," he said, "in a weird way, Patricia did us a favor. If she had not pushed you so hard, you never would have found that deed restriction. We would still be living under her rules, miserable and resigned. Sometimes it takes a crisis to force necessary change." He was right, though I would not give Patricia credit for anything intentional. She had been a bully who pushed too hard and suffered the consequences. The positive outcomes were despite her actions, not because of them. October arrived again, completing the cycle. 1 year since the settlement, 2 years since I had moved in, 3 years since my divorce had upended my life and sent me looking for a fresh start in Meadowbrook. I had found more than I bargained for: legal drama, community conflict, unexpected victory, and ultimately, a real home. The oak trees were in full autumn glory, their leaves brilliant red and gold against the blue Massachusetts sky. I stood on my front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. Kids waiting for the school bus, commuters heading to work, retirees starting their morning walks. Normal life, the kind worth fighting for. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. The HOA was planning a fall festival in the park, and she wanted to know if I would help judge a pie baking contest. I texted back my agreement. Why not? I was part of this community now, fully integrated and welcomed. Max bounded out through the dog door, ready for his morning walk. I finished my coffee, grabbed his leash, and headed out into the cool autumn morning. We walked our usual route through the neighborhood, then cut through the park. The trees were spectacular, leaves drifting down in lazy spirals. In the pavilion, volunteers were already setting up for the festival. Banners hung between posts, tables were being arranged, and someone was testing the sound system with bursts of static and music. It would be a good event, well attended and full of the kind of simple joy that makes communities strong. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from that first absurd find to the discovery that changed everything. It had been stressful and expensive and often frustrating. But it had also been worth it, not just for me, but for everyone who lived here. We had taken back our community from someone who saw it as their personal kingdom, and we had built something better in its place. The leaves crunched under my feet as Max and I walked home. More would fall tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. That was fine. I would rake them when I needed to on my schedule without fear. That was all I had ever wanted, the freedom to live my life in my home on my terms. I had fought for that right and won. The park would remain open for 99 years, serving the community as the Jameson family had intended 130 years ago. The HOA would continue to function, but under reasonable leadership that remembered its purpose was service, not control. And I would live here peacefully, enjoying the neighborhood I had helped to free. It was a good ending to an unexpected story. Not dramatic or flashy, just a return to normal life, which turned out to be all I really needed. The leaves would keep falling every autumn, and I would keep raking them, and that would be fine. Everything was fine now. Everything was as it should be. Justice had been served, bullies had been defeated, and a community had been healed. Sometimes, if you dig deep enough into the history, you find the tools you need to fight back. Sometimes, refusing to back down from an unjust fine leads to discovering you own the park everyone thought belonged to the HOA. Sometimes, the universe provides exactly what you need exactly when you need it. I unlocked my front door and let Max inside. He went straight to his water bowl while I headed to my home office to start work. Another ordinary day in an extraordinary neighborhood, where autumn leaves fell freely, and no one feared the knock of an overzealous HOA president. We had earned this peace, and we would protect it. That was my story. That was how I went from being fined for autumn leaves to discovering I owned the park and taking down a tyrannical HOA president in the process. It was not the fresh start I had envisioned when I moved to Meadowbrook, but it was the one I got. And honestly, I would not change a thing.